Titles podcast is brought to you by Land Trust Title Services, your partners for results. Well, hello, this is Steve Kaempf with the People Not Titles podcast, and I am so glad to be here with my good friend and real estate attorney, Marc Cervantes from Cervantes, Chatt, and Prince. Marc, welcome again. It's great to have you here.
It's great to be back, Steve. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you were a big hit the first time around, and you were must-see TV, so we wanted to do it again. So today, well, first off, Marc, I just wanted to get an update on what's happening with your firm. It's been about a year. Tell me, what's new? You have a couple of new attorneys, or at least one?
We've grown. So as you remember, we have our Chicago office, and we also have our Burr Ridge office.
Yep.
We've hired a couple new associates with regards to it. So as a review, I handle all the transactional, commercial and residential, and then my partners handle our condominium associations and litigation departments.
Great.
So we've hired more people for litigation, and we've hired more people we also do some estate planning. So we've kind of increased our capacity with regards to those things, so we can kind of the partners can focus on their individual practice areas. So we've grown. We see there's a need in the market for all our services. So we're happy about where our firm is going and how we're going to grow.
Great. So before we get into some of the nitty-gritties of the things we want to talk about, co-ops and commercial real estate, talk about how the litigation piece of it is complementing your practice, Marc.
Oh, no, it's great. So unfortunately, sometimes when we have a transactional matter, we'll get a phone call probably a year or two afterwards when there's post-closing issues. For instance, there are, hey, this was not disclosed, or this was fraud, or things happen with the physical condition of the property, and I can immediately then give them to our litigation department. In addition to that, we also have a new of counsel that we have hired on, and they handle all our tax appeals and zoning work. So we used to farm all those things out, but now we kind of keep them in-house, where, especially with the tax appeal work,
that's a big deal right now.
It automatically goes right into what we're doing with regards to each individual for commercial and residential, because as we tell people in Cook County, it is incumbent that everybody appeal their tax assessment.
Every single person?
Every single person,
Wow.
Because you don't pay the tax appeal attorney unless you win. So there's no cost.
To lose.
There's no cost to you. If the assessor's office determines that it's the same, then it has not cost you a thing.
And how often are we seeing that there's a benefit to the client to pursue that?
I would say it's probably at least 50 to 60%. Now, every 3 years in Cook County is a triennial reassessment, so sometimes we'll wait for that, but especially with commercial, we will always do that, what Kagi's office is doing, and it's always worth at least looking at it and filing the appeal.
Okay, and how about the estate planning piece of it? What was the heart behind adding that element?
Well, the thing about it is, so we were already doing a lot of land trust, and then people would, first-time home buyer, my usual question is, now this is a big investment. This is probably the most expensive thing you've bought in your life. You have children, things like that. So it was important for us to have somebody in-house to be able to do trust, wills, and all those things. But once again, we used to farm those things out, but now they stay in-house, or people will need to amend things. For instance, let's say they're moving in from California, and now they're adding property in Illinois. So it was very nice to have that in-house, because once again, everything kind of just flows and lends itself into other practice areas.
So when an agent works with you, referring you clients in business, their clients will get, it seems to me, like a more holistic experience.
Absolutely. Our tagline is, we are all things real estate. Very small matters that we don't handle, but if you go to us, we're not going to send you out necessarily to another firm. If we do, I mean, we're very confident in that firm that they can handle the business, but it just made sense as a business model to keep things in-house.
All right. Well, that's fantastic, and congratulations on the growth of your firm.
Thank
Marc.
you.
A lot of people are shrinking. A lot of people are tuck and tail, and you guys are building and growing. So it says something about your professionalism and your ability just to navigate the headwinds of the market and to continue to grow to serve your client base. So
Absolutely.
well done. I wanted to talk about two things today, Mark, that I thought were relevant. One, I saw you're very active in the co-op space, and I thought it might be a good thing for agents who are representing co-ops who are looking to show their buyers those types of properties, that just the pros and cons of it. So maybe we can get into that first and we get into the commercial.
Absolutely. So cooperatives or co-ops, we get them in waves. So sometimes we don't see anything for a year or two, but for whatever reason, in the last 12 months, we've received probably about 6 or 7 cooperatives where we're representing either the buyer or seller. And the thing about cooperatives are they're different than condominiums. So it's a specific type of buyer or seller with regards to these cooperatives. And in the city of Chicago, they're mostly bundled in Hyde Park and also the Gold Coast, almost up to Lakeview. So that's where we see them. And the difference between a co-op and a condominium is you don't own your actual property in a co-op. What happens is you own shares of a corporation, and the corporation owns the building in essence. And you actually get a stock certificate as the owner, and further then you receive a lease. So you're an actual lessee, the lessor is the corporation, and that's kind of the main difference as opposed to in a condominium, like we learned in law school, you own a box of air, right? You have your own PIN number, and that's what people are used to. But in a cooperative, there's one PIN number or two for the whole building, and you have your stock certificate. And another major difference is the sticker shock when you look at the monthly assessments. So if you're used to a condominium wherein you have your property tax and your assessments as different line items, and then if you're taking out a loan on it, then you have your loan amount. But with regards to a cooperative, you pay a very high assessment, but that is inclusive of, in essence, your traditional HOAs as well as your property taxes. They collect all of it because the cooperative pays for the property taxes. So on the monthly dollar value, it seems a lot higher. But if you were taken, let's say, an escrow with a lender,
considered,
they're about equal.
Okay, they're about equal. And so there was a little bit of an art form, right, to explaining to a buyer, especially a first-time buyer that's coming in. It's like, what? I don't own anything. What's happening here? So you have to be experienced in this matter. For
Absolutely,
sure.
And especially with agents, I would explain that the process of a cooperative is a lot different than a condominium. Let's say you or I just wanted to buy a condominium. We would maybe have a sales pack you fill out, what's your car VIN or license plate number, how many people are going to live in on it, and that's about it. But in a cooperative, the biggest difference is you are basically asking to join a company. So it's if Steve Kaempf owned ABC Corporation and I wanted to join on it because I think you're doing great things, you're going to do a lot of due diligence on me. The same goes for a cooperative. So a cooperative will ask you to fill out many forms. In essence, it's an application to be part of their community / be part of their company. So things that they're going to ask you for that you would not normally get on a condominium would be, for instance, all your financials. They're going to want to know that you can afford this. And a lot of people are hesitant about that, but if they know going in that it'll be somewhat like getting a loan where they're going to ask for all your tax returns, they're going to ask for all your retirement money, because once again, you're part of a company and they want to be able to know that you can pay your own share.
And the yin to that yang is, number one, hey, why do I have to qualify? Well, how dare them, right? On the other side of it, you move it into a place where everyone had to follow that same thing. And so there's some security in knowing that the barrier to entry for me is also the barrier to entry for my neighbors as well.
Correct. And the one thing about the difference is, so they still follow the Fair Housing Act and things like that.
Sure.
However, it's a unilateral decision because I've had people that have applied for co-ops and they've been denied. So they're
even though they qualified for a loan,
because the financial is only one part of it. So they're also judging you based on
credit history,
if you have criminal background. They're also looking at, I had one where the individual had to put together a brag book. In essence, he was a professional photographer, pretty famous. He had to put in a sample of all those things. He had to write a narrative as why they should choose him. So it's a lot more intrusive than a normal condominium.
Okay. Okay. And so there's an opportunity if you're going to be out there advocating for a property as an agent, there's an opportunity for you to have egg on your face, that the client is embarrassed, insulted because they had to jump through an additional hoop that they're not aware of. So it's a key thing to really prep your client for
I
it.
would recommend to any agent before making an offer on cooperative is get the sales package and say, are you comfortable with giving this information and having somebody determine if you're worthy of being able to live in this building.
Okay, fantastic. So those are the pros and the cons. And so, overall, Mark, they're being done all the time, right? So it's just a matter of, and to make sure that you have legal representation that understands how to navigate these things, right?
Correct. The biggest part of it is the application process, because what normally happens is you enter into a contract and each building is going to have different processes. And like I said, one building had a brag book. Another one is we've just done several in the last couple months where the number of forms that had to be filled out were probably in the double digits. And that included financial information, information about family members, and different things like that. I also recommend, and a lot of these buildings are older. They were built in the early 1900s, 1920s, and what happens is you'll want to upgrade the unit, and for instance, they won't let you touch certain things in the unit. So you can't just assume that you can completely gut a place, because there's usually a committee on if you're allowed to make changes to the building or to the unit itself. None of them really let you touch the exterior because they're older buildings. But if you, as a buyer, are not comfortable with their rules when it comes to making changes to the unit, that's another factor before making an offer on one of these cooperatives.
So it sounds restrictive. What about financing? Is financing pretty much the same?
So financing, we've found, and I'm sure there's more than this, Citibank is one of the major players with regards to cooperatives, because Citibank's out of New York City, and outside of Chicago, the area with the most cooperatives is in New York City. In New York, they're more common than they are in Chicago, and certain lenders will not lend in cooperatives because, once again, you're not lending to somebody to own property. You're lending to somebody basically to buy stock in a company.
So there's limitations on various things, plus there's limitations on your financing options. You have to go to a specific bank. It's not just one size fits all. So you might have an approval from XYZ Bank, and you might have to go get another one because now
they
you're
didn't
going to a cooperative.
because they didn't underwrite a cooperative.
Yep.
So I would say the majority of my clients that buy and sell are cash buyers.
And are valuations easy to determine? Is it the stock valuation based upon square footage, blah, 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 blah?
So, you can run CMAs or comparative market analysis based on sold properties, but the same analysis. The stock value is really the property value.
Okay, fantastic. Did we cover everything on co-ops that you think is pertinent?
Well, one of the things about co-ops also is, just getting to understand that more than likely, and this is anecdotal versus any sort of fact,
Sure.
they're older buildings and just the demographic of the people that live there. If you're 30 years old, you have a young child, that may not be the best place for you. For some people, and because I've asked my agents who's moving into these buildings, and they will say, sometimes they have younger families, but usually the demographics on the older side. So that's just something to think about. There's obviously you can't discriminate based on age, but that's what I found in most of these buildings is the average age of the stockholders or shareholders, they like to call themselves, is on the older side.
Okay, good to know. Anything else on co-ops, Mark, that you think is pertinent?
And if there's something that any of the viewers would like to talk about, we've done multiple, but each deal has been a little different. As you know, we just did one big one, and this is a cool aside where it was a unit on Lakeshore Drive, and the Wrigleys actually had owned that unit. It was a 2-unit building, 2 units in one, and just the history of it was pretty cool. because when I did a little research on the building itself, found out that the titans in the industry at that time in the 1920s or mid 1920s, they went to New York. They found one of the best architects in New York. They said, we want this in Chicago. So you had people like Marshall Field, you had the Wrigleys, you had all the people that were running the city at that time. They built in there, and just to mimic something that was built in New York City. So the history of it's really cool.
Yeah.
And
it's iconic.
Very much
That's
so.
why people want it, right? That's
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's on Lakeshore Drive. You always
Yeah.
have the park to your east, so you'll never have anything in front of you. So that's one of the positives of the cooperatives, is that the location of these properties. It's not just some 3-unit building somewhere else in the city. They're really, really specific, and people look for that.
Yeah, and so any developer right now is not going to do the co-op route in that sense.
I haven't seen any new co-op buildings being built.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a movement at one point where people were converting from co-op to condominiums.
Yes.
But I haven't seen that in probably about 10 or 15 years. But, like I said, there are a lot of positives of it, especially location.
Yes.
Right? And if you want a certain location in the city of Chicago, a cooperative may be your best choice.
So it seems to me like, rather than, oh my gosh, I want a co-op, people fall in love with the property, and then they find out, oh, it's a co-op or whatever, and they kind of navigate through that and kind
Correct.
of, tolerate that, as opposed to choosing that as a method or a type of property they're looking to pursue.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. All right, Mark, I wanted to get into anything else on the co-ops? No, we're good. Mark, I wanted to get into some commercial activity because, we have there's a lot of residential real estate attorneys that once they get they might be able to span into some commercial business, but not to the extent that you're able to. And so I think it's important for agents and buyers and sellers to know, when they deal with you, they're dealing with someone that has a vast variety of expertise in the commercial space. And so maybe talk just a little bit about your experience in the commercial space, and then some of the recent properties that you're doing, so people get a flavor for what's happening with you and your firm and just your level of expertise.
Sure. And I would say this about realtors as well. I mean, I have a lot of residential realtors that really know their stuff. They've been doing it for decades or years, but they've never done a commercial. So I would like to first start with how I define commercial.
Sure.
So a lot of attorneys and realtors define commercial as multifamily residential. So you have your traditional 3-flat, you can do an apartment building of 20 units and things like that. But the nice thing about my background is that I do more than just that. Obviously, we do a lot of that just based on, we represent a lot of developers that build new construction. I have clients that are investors that buy multifamily, multi-units as investments. But I also do things like warehouses. I do other things. So part of my history was, I was lucky enough early on in my career, I was outside counsel for waste management. And I learned really that end of commercial as part of my practice when I did a lot of waste management transactions throughout the whole country.
Which is like office, industrial,
All of it.
land, just on and on, development.
Yes, landfills and things
Yes,
like that.
yes.
So I really learned, and I was really lucky early on in my career that I learned the commercial side of that business. Now, it's very rare that I'll do a landfill now, just because that my business model doesn't cover it, but I could do it. I understand the things to look for. I can issue spot with regards to that. But a lot of the concepts I learned at Waste Management in doing that commercial work throughout the country, I'm able to apply to what we do here. So with regards to industrial warehousing, there are certain things that you're going to look for as opposed to multifamily commercial. For instance, we just did 2 interesting deals. One deal we did was in the Village of Lyons, and we were selling a truck dealership. And my client had owned the land for 30, 40 plus years. A Ford dealership was the tenant. So the issues that we were looking for in that were environmental issues, because a larger entity that owns lots of Ford dealerships throughout the country, and to be honest with North America, they were buying it. So I had to deal with counsel for the lessee. I had to deal with counsel for the purchaser. And a lot of these commercial deals that I do on the bigger end, I have people I'm talking to in New York or London or wherever. In this case, I was talking to an attorney out of Dallas, Texas. That's where the in-house counsel was for that corporation that was buying it. So we had to, number one, the difference between regular residential and commercial is we deal not in residential contracts, but we deal with PSAs, or the PSAs are the contracts themselves. So the contract is drafted between, because there's no form contract, for instance, between buyer and seller. So in a normal transaction, we'll take the LOI or letter of intent, and the other attorney and I will immediately speak to each other, and we will go through several different red lines, and we'll create our contract, our PSA. So
the People Not Titles podcast is proud to be sponsored by Land Trust Title Services, your partners for results.
So, and that's a major difference, because if you're just used to residential, where's the form contract, and then you have your form letter that you're used to putting out there, but there's a lot of thought and there's a lot of negotiation on the onset. The nice thing about commercial is we charge hourly on commercial. Unlike residential, where we usually have a flat fee, we're able to charge hourly, because this deal I billed probably about 80 to 90 hours on it, because it took a year and a half. And the term of these transactions are a lot longer. Sometimes they're shorter, especially on multifamilies. They sometimes can be 45 to 60 days. But on these larger commercial deals, like in this case, it took a long time.
And there's a lot of moving parts. It's not just 5 days after inspection. It's ongoing.
Oh, and it is very specific to that transaction. Now, do I use certain templates and paragraphs from other transactions? But but it's learned. And a client will ask me, he's like, "So can you get me a contract tomorrow?" I said, "Well, not really, because we collaborate."
You don't want me to?
No. We collaborate wholly, and some of these commercial leases, they're not 5 pages; they're like 50 pages, 100 pages. So, and the page number in itself is not going to tell me how much work I have to put in, but there's a lot of moving parts, and that's where our experience with 1031s come in with regards to that also. And one of the things that communication is always important to us, regardless of what type of transaction we do. But it's really important in these, especially if I have somebody that is a seasoned real estate professional. In this case, with the car dealership, they were seasoned. So we were always trying to put into place the timing. Because with 1031s, there are your very specific and rigid dates that we need to adhere to. So, and what I like to tell people is always know what you're going to buy first before you sell. So we don't have to do a reverse 1031. I mean, I could talk about 1031s all day long, but it's nice because even if I have a first-time person that's buying or selling that is thinking about doing a 1031, I will discuss this with them. I will give them advice with regards to it, because it's really important, that whole idea of what am I going to buy first, so that I don't get caught on the timing issue. And we have knowledge and we have experience with those kind of issues.
Okay. And great. Were they selling land and the business?
No, in this case, they were only selling the land.
Okay.
That's why I had a lot of conversations with the tenant's attorney, because the tenant actually owned the business. So we were basically running multiple transactions regarding all these negotiations. So we had endless conference calls.
Okay.
Different people in different time zones and things like that. So you have to really be on top of your game, and also at making sure that everything is correct with regards to it. Otherwise, if you're not organized, something can fall through the cracks.
Yeah. And
with something like this, we found that the village was very important also, because obviously we have to deal with EPA stuff. But a lot of these villages their biggest leverage point is at the time of the sale. So they sent in their inspectors to make sure that the building was suitable for sale. And obviously they had a whole litany of things. So we had several meetings with the village, because the villages will sometimes let the buyers take it subject to, because most of these deals are as-is deals anyways.
Sure.
So the village will come up with a list, buyer will take it subject to, but then you have to worry about bonds and things like that. So there's all these negotiations going out throughout the whole transaction that you would never get in a residential transaction.
Yeah, so the expertise piece of it is key. And did the property close?
It did.
Okay, fantastic.
It
Congratulations.
did. Absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And the nice thing about these deals, they're in the multi-millions.
Yeah.
So, when I tell my staff, just because it has more zeros, our analysis doesn't change, and you just use what you've learned over the years.
Or less zeros,
yes.
right? Yeah,
Absolutely.
Okay, anything that you would speak to in terms of residential agents that are looking to do commercial, and have you had any deals where you become the expert for them, where they could capitalize on an opportunity by leveraging you and your firm?
Absolutely. So another transaction that we had recently was a multifamily. I met a gentleman at a networking event, and he was going to be buying his first multifamily. It was an 8 or 10 unit building. So, things that we interjected, because he was the buyer and also the buyer's realtor at the same time, things we interjected that he never would have thought of. For instance, the things that we ask for are, and we always get a fight on these, are tenant estoppels. What a tenant estoppel, they're normal for regular commercial, like if I was selling a strip mall, for instance.
Sure.
Most tenants and most buyer sides and sell sides, they expect that. But what we ask for when we're representing people that are buying multifamilies are tenant estoppels. And in essence, a tenant estoppel is a written statement drafted by a party whereby the tenant will sign off on it. It will ask questions like, my lease runs from this date to this date. I have such and such security deposit at this amount. And the purpose of it is because you can't just rely on the lease itself, because there's a lot of handshake outside of the four corners
I
of
gave Joe
page.
the money, I did this, we traded painting for this,
Correct.
or whatever
Or
it
I
was.
mow the grass
Yeah.
and he gives me $50 off.
Yeah,
And
whatever
so
it is.
it avoids that.
Yeah.
So there's no outside.
So it's basically confirming what is represented in the offer, confirming that these tenants are actually paying this amount, have this amount on deposit, blah, 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 blah. So there's no boogeyman coming out of the bushes.
And the reason for that is because prior to me just doing transaction work, I litigated for a very long time. So my knowledge of landlord-tenant is pretty vast. I mean, obviously our firm, we file probably about 100 evictions a month. So the purpose of that was so that if we kept the file in-house, and I knew what a judge would be looking for if we had to go through an eviction. And with an estoppel, I can ask a tenant on the stand, is this your signature? These are the terms. So basically, I had them red-handed if they were trying to say something else.
Right.
Now, there's a lot of push and pull with estoppels, because a lot of people don't want them on the multifamilies, but we really push them. And it's something then we have a discussion with our clients. Look, during attorney review, we've asked for this. This is a reason why we asked for this. Seller's not willing to give it to us. This is your exposure. We're all about explaining to clients their exposure.
Yes.
Because, in a perfect world, you never have to evict a client, but that's not the case.
Yeah, fantastic. Anything else that you think people should be aware about in the commercial space and just your
So
area of
one of the
expertise?
things that's come up, and we have personal experience, and I have personal experience with this, is this is specific to Chicago, for instance. Let's say that somebody wants to buy a piece of property. Has let's call it 2 PIN numbers, 2 lots. You have an improvement on one lot, and then you have a side lot. Maybe they put the kids' playground, or they just kept their grass, and you throw the football around on it. And you have a client that's coming in that wants to buy it, and their idea of it's, well, this is a double wide lot. I can probably potentially build X, Y, and Z there. I always tell people, talk to the alderman, because the zoning for that existing structure may not transfer to you as a buyer. We've actually run into this before, where people didn't do their due diligence, and they've bought the property, and they go in to get their building permits, and it's not allowed.
Where the previous owner might have been grandfathered in, but as
Correct.
soon as it gets into a sales situation.
So if you're looking for something specific to that issue, it's always good to talk to a zoning attorney. And once again, that's one of the reasons we have an of-counsel, and I could just give him, hey, this is the address. Take a look at this. This is their intent. This is what they want to build. Is this something that they either need a variance for, a zoning change for, all those things, because we've had clients buy pieces of property that they can't use.
So as an agent, it's really important when someone's looking to buy a property to really find out what's your plans, not just next year.
Oh,
or whatever.
absolutely.
5 years, 10 years down the road, what are you hoping
What
to
is
do?
your intent here?
Yeah.
Absolutely, because if you know that going in, then you could do all the due diligence because it may not be the right property for you.
Okay. Anything else that you want to cover on the commercial piece of it, Mark?
You know, the other interesting thing was we just did a marijuana store just recently. So once again, there was a lot of zoning work to be put on it. And the one thing, my clients were the sellers in this case. And, you know, this deal, it went for about a year and a half.
So the buyer coming in was going to put in a marijuana store.
Correct.
Okay.
So the good thing about it is the buyer was a savvy buyer. They had opened up a marijuana store in other places in Chicago. So they knew how to navigate the zoning and things like that. So, and a lot of these commercial deals, we have long contingencies because if that buyer couldn't put the marijuana store there, they weren't going to buy the property. So you have to set expectations for sellers. Because sometimes we have sellers that hold this property for 30 or 40 years. And in this case, we had 4 owners. 3 of the 4 owners were dead. And what I like to call the old timers, they used to put things in land trusts. So you had land trusts that had beneficiary with living trust. The beneficiaries were dead. So it was, I mean,
complicated.
We had to create flow charts and see who had the authority to do so. We do a ton of deals where land trusts are involved. Land trusts are, I'm not going to say specific to Chicago. We created them here in Illinois. But a lot of states don't have them. Explaining to people, look, we have to wait because they have to get their zoning. So setting expectations at the very beginning, because people see a number at the end, like, where's my money? So, and that adds stress to a transaction. So at the very beginning, we explain to them,
back them way off.
Look, in a perfect world, maybe we can get here, but realistically, we're dealing with, you know, the county and the city, so you may not get your proceeds right away.
And is marijuana the hot one in terms of the zoning, and if there's a fit, or are there other examples that you're seeing come up more often?
Well, right now that's kind of dominated everything. You know, at this point it's slowed down. I mean, when it got approved recreationally and they added more licenses and things, I'm seeing, and I don't do a lot of it, but I'm seeing, you know, people and companies falling to the wayside and they're coming together. But that is still something that some of my clients have properties that the buyers are interested in putting in.
Okay, interesting. So let's talk just about the future of the firm, Mark. You guys, from the last time we talked, there's been a big uptick in just your expertise level and all the various things, offerings. What's the hope over the next, let's say, 5 years for the firm?
Well, I mean, one of the things, we've just hired a marketing manager. So we were kind of doing it ad hoc between my partners and I. But this then allows us to communicate more. So, you know, we've always talked about doing a quarterly newsletter. That will probably be in the works. Our showings in social media, they've always been there, but it's going to be on a more regular basis. So we foresee that increasing our exposure to past clients, to new clients and things like that. So as our business grows, we're going to probably need to hire, you know, look, will we ever have a firm of 100 attorneys? Probably not. But, you know, we want our growth to be measured and as well as capturing past clients, because that's something that I don't think we had done enough of, is because I've been in practice for 24 years now. I have a wealth of past clients, and maybe they may have heard from me once every couple of years, but now we're hoping that's going to be on a consistent basis.
Yeah, everything seems to be real organic for you, and now there's some intentionality to the to getting the exposure out there and the word out.
Correct. Yeah, we just wanted to make sure that, you know, we've been doing this for a long time. You know, referrals are always going to be one of our largest sources. However, you know, if people forgot about us, and this will allow us to be in their, you know, minds more often.
Yeah, Mark, it's impressed me too that you've always been philanthropically minded. You've been on the boards of things. So what's important to you in terms of that regard that you're really advocating for in your spare time?
So, one of the things that I've always believed in is, I was lucky in that my parents valued education. They pushed me to succeed. There's a lot of things going on in this world right now where people are behind the eight ball for whatever reason. And so I do volunteer work for an organization called Big Shoulders. And their mission is to raise funds for children in the city of Chicago to go to Catholic schools. I'm a product of Catholic schools.
Yeah.
I believe in the education. The metrics show that the people that go to the Catholic schools that have the opportunity to, their test scores are higher than comparative schools in their neighborhoods. They graduate high school, they go on to college, and they go on to get four-year degrees.
And there's a lot of parents that have a desire to send their kids, they just can't do it.
Correct.
And so they're able to tap into this.
Yeah, and I was explaining, so right now we are in the second year of a program called the Big Shoulders Law Program, where we go into individual grade schools, specifically seventh graders, and we teach law to them. So I have a school in East Humboldt Park where I've been going since the fall. We teach about certain criteria of law. There's a test case, and at the end of the school year, we're going to have a competition at some of the big law firms, and then the winners of that competition will actually go present in front of federal judge at federal court.
Wow.
So,
That's pretty cool.
and when I speak to these children, when I was growing up, I had friends that had parents that were attorneys, doctors, accountants. These children don't necessarily have that. So giving them the opportunity and say, look, you can do this as well. And it's fun because, we're doing this, mock trial of some sort.
Yep.
And they're going to get graded. They're going to compete against other schools. The organization also does a stock market program. So anything to expose these students to things that they, we thought were normal, because I talked finance with my parents, like, what IBM stock am I going to buy, this and that. They're probably not getting that at home. So we're exposing them to that, and hopefully they'll want to take their studies and other things to the next level because now they've been exposed to it.
They get a vision for their professional life.
Correct. And their parents would not have been able to afford parochial schools if not for the scholarships that we raise for them.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And where can they, if people want to know about that more, they just reach out to you?
Yeah, or you can go to bigshouldersfund.org, and there's a ton of volunteer opportunities, and it's great. We clean schools, we do things, and it's amazing because I always say to myself, maybe one of these students may one day become one of my employees.
That's amazing. Mark, so you have a unique, you're speaking personally, a unique, that's a abundance mentality, right? Where did you get that from? Just this idea of there's enough of my, people would say, I don't have time for that, or I don't have the money for that, or all that kind of thing. What gives you that spirit and that heart to invest into that?
Well, like I said, I really believe in the parochial setting that I went to grade school, high school with. Obviously, it starts at home, and your parents instill certain values in you about excelling yourself, but also making sure that the community, that you're always doing something to better other people. It starts there, and then as you grow, one of the things you realize is sometimes making other people happy is the best thing to make yourself happy.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's cool. Well, Mark, I want to thank you for coming in. I want to thank you for the chat. I think you are top level, and so if an agent would, if they're looking for an attorney, you should be one of their first choices. So thanks a lot.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you for the kind words.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Signing off. People Not Titles podcast. Thank you. Hey, thanks for listening to the People Not Titles podcast. We are proudly sponsored by Land Trust Title Services. If you enjoyed the podcast, please hit the like button, please subscribe, and we'd love it if you'd share our podcast with your friends. Thanks a lot.